Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this session of the World University Summit 2023, the session called Holistic Higher Education, the Role of Interdisciplinary Studies in Overcoming Challenges of the 21st Century. So I'm pleased to welcome the panelists of this session, Vice Chancellor Ananya Mukherjee, Professor Bernard Duncker, Ambassador Stephen Mull, and Professor Wendy Wolford. Very warm welcome to all of you. My role here at Jindal Global University currently is as Dean of the Jindal School of Languages and Literature. I'm broadly involved in English studies, although my root discipline, since disciplinarity is at issue here, my root discipline is history, but I've made a lot of forays into literary studies as well, and I always feel that I've learned quite a lot from anthropology as a historian. So just to introduce myself there and give you a little sense of what animal you're dealing with here. So this is one of very many sessions dealing with various issues and challenges confronting higher education in the 21st century, and certainly interdisciplinarity is a buzzword. There's scarcely any national education establishment in the world that doesn't have rafts of documents produced in recent years touting the benefits of interdisciplinarity and urging us all to become as interdisciplinary as soon as possible. Each of us has probably experience that imperative in certain ways through our own disciplines, whether we are primarily administrators or functioning professors or whatever. We've all encountered interdisciplinarity in various ways, so often through the lenses of our own particular disciplines. And of course, a lot of the recent literature about interdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity, postdisciplinarity draw attention to that fact that on a certain level, there are all kinds of things we can talk about in a perfectly civil way and understand one another as general academics, but perhaps in some cases, to greater or lesser extent, our disciplinary training may sometimes present some kind of barriers to certain kinds of conversations. And I hope this session will I hope not prove that claim that I made, but rather maybe disprove it. So we'll see what happens here. Interdisciplinarity is something that the Indian higher education establishment has been taking very seriously, at least in kind of programmatic documents, such as the Indian government's New Education Policy 2020. The documents are sprinkled with the term interdisciplinarity and urging all kinds of Indian higher education institutions to dive into interdisciplinarity. Interdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity, and I guess most recently postdisciplinarity. There are gifted theoreticians and practitioners who say that we're perhaps on our way towards a condition of postdisciplinarity, as long as too many bad old conservatives, stuck in their disciplinary silos don't get into the way. There are various, of course, predictions about how likely it is that institutions and national education establishments will move into this supposedly better condition of whatever it is, interdisciplinarity or postdisciplinarity. Anyway, the panelists were all given several questions and statements to consider before they participate in this session. But I want to give each of you a chance to say something in the way of a kind of introductory statement about, where you stand on the matter, or, give some observations that you believe are relevant to the topic at hand. So if Vice Chancellor Mukherjee would begin by just speaking for maybe, 4 or 5 minutes in the way of introduction.
Thank you. We're very happy to be here on this panel on this topic that is actually very dear to my heart. Explaining my own journey, I studied economics in India, which was fairly unidisciplinary, very rigorous training in fairly quantitative based discipline. And then I went to the US. I studied at USC, where I did an interdisciplinary PhD. And it wasn't, going into it, we were, a lot of us were not sure exactly how it would work out. It was an interdisciplinary PhD in economics and public policy. And we had the opportunity to take courses in philosophy, international relations, sociology, political science. And so it was a very important opening of my thought processes in understanding. And at that time, that was India's first phase of liberalization. And when I was writing my dissertation, that was what I was trying to understand. So it was almost impossible to do it without the advantage of several disciplines. And then I'll fast forward many years. I became a dean at the university, at York University in Toronto, of a dean of faculty of liberal arts and professional studies. It's the largest liberal arts faculty in Canada. It had 23,000 students and 92 programs, which were a mix of traditional humanities and social science and business programs, and some programs which were interdisciplinary, like business and society, development, urban studies, and so on. So that in 2015 in urban Toronto gave me a whole other understanding of how interdisciplinarity was not an option anymore, that it has really become a part of our disciplines in a way we may not have realized. And the younger generation of students who were trying to prepare for many different aspirations, it was clear to me that they needed the grounding of disciplines and the breadth of interdisciplinarity. So we did a lot of experiments there that I can talk about if we have time later. And then fast forward again, last year, I took up this assignment to become Vice Chancellor of one of India's private universities. And we began at the university began as a multidisciplinary university with a 4-year research degree, which at that time we were the first university to offer that. And it was quite a journey to have, a model where you either become an engineer or a doctor or a scientist, to suddenly come to a university where you become an engineer, but you must take core courses in 8 areas and about 7 subjects, right? But what we saw in that is our students really, if you ask them the one thing about their university experience that they love and they gain from, this is the one thing everybody mentions, irrespective of whether they're an engineer or a chemist or a dancer or an artist. So again, fast forwarding to the new education policy, which talks about interdisciplinarity. And then for a university like ours, which has got the status of institution of eminence, where we have a mandate to promote interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary education, I feel that it is not only not an option anymore to say whether we do or not, but our students are far ahead of us in that. Their thinking is so grounded in, grounded in breadth, and they're so hungry for breadth of knowledge that universities must deliver on that frontier. The same I see about our faculty. So the faculty we have here are mostly trained in the US, some in Canada, some in Europe. And they've all gone through, in top universities, a strong general education grounding, or those wonderful first-year seminars that many of your universities you have. And they have come with this also strong grounding in wanting to explore questions in a broad way. So I found myself now in this, university in India where we're mostly still studying in not in interdisciplinary models, but we've in a very special place where we are mandated to do interdisciplinarity. And what I found in this 1 year, because the new education policy asks or almost mandates everybody to think around these lines, the appetite for this different kind of thinking, different kind of education has suddenly become a lot more articulate. It is absolutely in the public realm. The challenges, and you had some of the questions doing that it doesn't happen just by itself. How do you institutionalize? So here, I want to say two things. One is, yes, we do need institutional measures and policies to make it happen, whether it be tenure and promotion policies, grading mechanisms, pedagogy, all of that. But at one level, it is also a habit of the mind. We do really need to, whatever are our structural constraints, this is what I say to everybody who says, I cannot overnight, I cannot become multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary. This is one thing I say, that at some level, it's a habit of the mind. You can do it in any classroom or outside the classroom or through any project. So I will stop here and continue. I want to hear the others. But this is something that I would like to talk about. One is, what are the institutional structures we need? And the other is, how do we start? Whatever is the institutional structure, how do we just start on that path, on that journey of interdisciplinarity? So I'll stop here and wait to hear the others.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Mukherjee. Professor Duncker, if you'd like to give a couple introductory remarks about this.
Yeah, and so thank you so much for the invitation. It's really an honor to be here, and really excited to chat with the colleagues around the virtual table here. So my journey to interdisciplinarity really was an interesting one as well, I'd say. I mean, I did my postdoc at a very focused cancer research institute in Lausanne, Switzerland, and there was a rich collection of researchers, but I'd say the approaches, the techniques were very focused and effective. And initially, when I moved to the University of Waterloo, it was to a very broadly based biology department. And at first, I think I felt like it was a bit of a letdown, or, it was a challenge because I wasn't surrounded by, all these molecular cell biology researchers that were, examining the same processes and could teach me a little bit more about the same approaches or extensions of the approaches. I thought, oh, have I made a mistake? But just attending the weekly biology seminar series, and it was everything from, molecular biologists to field ecologists, right? And bioinformaticians. That was really important too, for me to be exposed to those types of tools that I hadn't had much experience with in my postdoc. And that was just the biology department, right? Then I, experienced kind of the water cooler effect, if you like. One building over from me was a major math building. And actually, one of the distinguishing features, I guess, about the University of Waterloo is that we have an entire math faculty. And one of the applied mathematicians just showed up in my office one day, kind of unannounced, and said, hey, I've read about your work. I work with bacteria, you work with yeast. That's kind of the next step. I want to model cellular processes in a eukaryote. And I was very skeptical at first, but the more I talked, I thought, well, this guy, he really understands, and he's interested in the biology. And I'm terrible at math, but I'll listen to him as a biologist, because I kind of didn't take the more hard sciences, so to speak. And it just evolved amazingly. And one thing I really learned, and I'm interested in, chatting more about this, is how very important students are as bridges across the disciplines, right? So the key for me in developing this collaboration with this amazing colleague was to have a student who was keen and kind of learned both languages, if you like, and acted as a very effective bridge. So that was the first part of my journey. And then I got into administration at the University of Waterloo, initially as an associate dean of science. And then, of course, I was exposed to, 6 different units within within science. And currently I have the role of Associate Vice President, Research and International. And so there I deal with researchers, across the university, 6 different faculties. And within each of those faculties, it's interesting to see the degree of interdisciplinarity. There's quite a bit actually within each of them, but it's still a little bit siloed at the university in terms of some of the activities and not perhaps fulfilling the full promise of interdisciplinarity. So we have another, way of bringing folks together, and probably the same to a lot of the institutions represented here today. That's interdisciplinary centers and institutes. And so everything from quantum to water research to nanotechnology. We even have a games institute that deals with the virtual world and it's all its applications. So that's been a tremendous pleasure. And I've had a chance, I think, at this point to see some things that work and don't work. So I could go on, but I want to give some of the other panelists a chance. So thanks very much for the opportunity to participate this evening.
Thank you, Professor Duncker. Ambassador Mull, would you like to share your observations about interdisciplinarity and these issues as you experience them?
Yes, thanks very much, Dean Leighton, and warm greetings to you and all my friends there at Jindal Global University. And it's a pleasure and an honor to be with such a distinguished panel. I take this question very seriously here at the University of Virginia in the United States. I'm a relative newcomer to the academic world. I served as a diplomatic practitioner for most of my adult life, and decided to move into education back in 2018 when I came here to the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. And as a recovering diplomat, I kind of got used to dealing with challenges over the course of my life that would come across my desk as an ambassador, whether it had to do with protecting and advancing democracy and human rights, promoting economic growth, helping to promote international cooperation on the fight against climate change and how to make ourselves more environmentally sustainable to deal with climate change. It was just very obvious to me that the main challenges facing practitioners in diplomacy and government and public policy around the world are all very interdisciplinary in nature. When you want to promote economic growth, sustainable economic growth, you need to come up with answers from environmentalists, from business leaders, from economists, certainly, from public policy experts, from social workers. It really requires complex inputs from across the spectrum. And so when I arrived here at the University of Virginia, and I know we're not alone here, I look forward to hearing Dr. Wolford's experience at Cornell. We are a very siloed institution. And it has been relatively a challenge to me to figure out how do we break out of those silos to promote the kind of interdisciplinary collaboration that is absolutely vital to solving the problems that the global community faces. As a public university here at the University of Virginia, we really measure our values and our success in the service that we provide to our broader communities in discovering and advancing new knowledge and applying that knowledge for the benefit of broader society, not just here in Charlottesville or the United States, but throughout the world. So if it's so obvious that these solutions require interdisciplinary collaboration, Why isn't it happening as quickly as all of us would like it to be? And I have to say that I'm especially glad to be increasingly engaged as a university with partners like Jindal Global University in India, a relatively new university, and to hear the experiences of Vice Chancellor Mukherjee and our other Indian friends and partners, because you're really creating a new mode for university research and education as relatively new institutions. And I think that those of us who've been around for a couple of hundred years, like we at the University of Virginia, have a lot to learn from how you all are solving these problems. The principal challenge I think that we face in moving to a more interdisciplinary mode of operation is that we don't really have, and Vice Chancellor Mukherjee alluded to this, we don't really have a system of standards and processes in place to reward and promote interdisciplinary talent. And instead, we concentrate on a performance evaluation system in the promotion and tenuring process that's completely based within each discipline. And the people who run those processes are the senior most accomplished scholars in each of those disciplines. So it's perhaps not surprising that they will put the most value on those colleagues who devote most of their research and effort into advancing that particular discipline. So I think key to solving this problem for universities in the longer term is to reform the promotion and tenuring system so that there is a vital component here at UVA. Promotion and tenure is based on teaching, on research, and on service to the university community. And so I think it's important, even if we don't expand those three standards, that we find a way to introduce an interdisciplinary element into each of those three main pillars for success in the promotion and tenuring system. And what we're learning here at the University of Virginia, and I suspect this is true at universities around the world, is that systems tend to follow the money. So it's important to devote resources and money that rewards scholarship, interdisciplinary scholarship, and teaching. And I'm pleased to say that here at University of Virginia, our leadership embraces this idea. And as a research institution, we tend to find that the emphases that we put on research basically then echo in how we teach, in how we recruit both students and scholars. So the research enterprise is a really important place to start. Now, in the past couple of years, we've decided to make a pretty substantial investment into our research enterprise. I hope that in the course of the next few years, we'll be investing up to about $1 billion into the research enterprise here, which includes basic research infrastructure, like supporting our faculty and getting grants, in substantially expanding our data computing capabilities here at the university. But in establishing the research disciplines, the research priorities that we're going to be funding, we've established 5 major areas, each of which has a very, very important interdisciplinary component. So for example, we have identified democracy as an important research priority, and that involves the entire range of the social sciences, political scientists, certainly, economists, environmentalists, all of which are affected by how healthy democracy is. And the research awards, the grants that we make to our faculty, faculty who apply for them have to demonstrate that the project they're planning in democracy has an interdisciplinary component. It's the same for our other 4 research priorities, which include environmental resilience and sustainability, the science of the brain and neuroscience, the role of digital technology and society, and precision health and medicine, all of which have substantial interdisciplinary components. So any faculty member who wants a piece of these substantial resource funds is going to have to prove that they are doing it not just on behalf of their own particular discipline, but in collaboration with multiple others. And the more interdisciplinary projects that come for funding, the better the chances are that they will be funded. We also have other programs here. It's our mascot here is the Cavalier. So we have a 3 Cavaliers program where we provide special well-endowed research funds for, it's called the 3 Cavaliers program, when at least 3 faculty members from different disciplines come forward for funding. So as we reward and incentivize our research by prioritizing interdisciplinary collaboration, we're also beginning to develop majors for our undergraduates that follow on from this research. Global Studies here is our most popular undergraduate major, has about 450 students who participate, and by its very nature, Global Studies program addresses global health, development studies, peace and security studies, global commerce and its impact on how the world interacts. And so we're getting more and more resources, faculty support in teaching this, and I expect that will continue to grow. We also have a pretty new and very successful interdisciplinary major in media studies, which also by its nature is very interdisciplinary. And so we're looking to hope that by expanding these curriculum offerings and offering more interdisciplinary majors, paired with these major new incentives for interdisciplinary research, that will then make it easier to break through some of these bureaucratic silos that entrench disciplines and the role of disciplines in promotion and tenure decisions so well. So it's going to be a long process, but it's one we're very committed to, and we're eager to learn from colleagues like you all on the panel. So I'll stop there. I look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Mull. Professor Wolford, would you like to make some introductory remarks about interdisciplinary studies and their future?
Well, I almost don't feel like I have to, because I would just second pretty much everything that all of my colleagues have said. This is wonderful. Thank you. Thank you to OP Jindal for the invitation. And it's a real pleasure to get to talk about interdisciplinarity, because it has been, I think, such a focus of my own work, but also something I really believe in. I would say, and I'm sure this is true for all of us, I don't believe in interdisciplinarity for its own sake, right? I know it's a buzzword, it has been important, but interdisciplinarity is key when it helps to answer certain kinds of questions. So basic science, whether it is in the physical and life sciences or basic humanities, where you're digging into particular text to answer a question that's very specific and potentially very disciplinary bound, that kind of work is incredibly valuable. And I think what we're realizing is that there are certain kinds of questions that really do require that interdisciplinary focus. And when those are on the table, we need to be able to have the structures in place to encourage and facilitate that kind of work. So I'll just say I have a connection, I think, to everybody here on this panel, because I did an undergraduate degree in economics in Canada. So there it touches everybody. I was at McGill and I loved economics and I thought I would continue on in it. But in my junior year, I ended up taking the full year off. It was after junior year. And I worked in Brazil, and in part because I became really convinced in my economics degree that the main issue confronting maybe the world, but any given society, was inequality. And I went to Brazil because I was able to work there with a landless movement where the participants in the movement were struggling for access to land and engaging in large-scale land occupations. I went and I worked with the movement and came back really committed to thinking about how to understand this movement better and wanted to go into graduate school. I assumed I would go into economics and was sort of rudely informed that economics at the graduate level is quite heavily model driven and very much, at least in the United States, dependent on econometrics. So I had the great gift of being able to talk to a person who became a colleague in geography. And he said, for what you want to do, geography is your discipline. And so I went into a discipline that by its own nature is very interdisciplinary. And we have these conversations all the time. Are we the bridge, or are we showing people that the bridge is there, right? So this is your question, Dean Leighton, about the interdisciplinary versus transdisciplinary that I won't go into, but I think it's an important question. What do we mean when we say interdisciplinarity? So I would say when I graduated with my PhD from Berkeley, I think then the buzzword was sort of interdisciplinarity, but there were very few resources. There was a lot of lip service. There was not a lot of funding. There wasn't that sort of discussion that Ambassador Mull talked about how you really think through tenure and what kind of support faculty need if they're going to be engaging in these interdisciplinary questions and still get promoted and still be respected and still be able to publish all the things they need to. I think that, an experience I had early on was applying to one of the new, this was maybe 12 years ago, NSF, our National Science Foundation, created some new interdisciplinary programs around environmental sort of questions, the coupled human natural systems program. And so you would put together a proposal that was very interdisciplinary, brought together people from across the physical, life, social, humanities, sciences, and then it would be reviewed by people who were squarely in a particular discipline. And so your reviews would all come back quite negative because they would say your disciplinary chops aren't sufficiently worked out. So it took a while. I would say in the last 10 or 12 years, we've come a really long way across the academy, at least here in the United States. I think that many other places are quite farther ahead than we are. And my Brazilian colleagues, they belong much more commonly to interdisciplinary departments. I think the new universities like OP Jindal, like others in India, have so much energy because they came into this already focused on problems. And it's really problem solving that makes you, like the inequality question that drove me to work with the landless in Brazil, if you're thinking about things from a problem perspective, then it doesn't necessarily matter that 3 dead white men 100 years ago said, think about these things, right? What matters is how can I understand this particular situation and potentially think about making a change, right? So this also speaks very much to Dean Duncker's sort of emphasis on applied sciences and thinking about a way to make a difference. There's so much more to say, but I know we'll have time in question and answers. I think that now in the last 10 years, it has really changed. And like my colleagues have said, the push is coming from the bottom up and the top down. So the bottom-up push from faculty and students who are more and more focused, I mean, thank goodness for students, right, who have the energy and the vision to be able to push us on sustainability, on climate change, on inequality, on human rights, on so many issues that now really do say, well, okay, we need a new major in that. And that major can't just be political science because we can't leave things just to one group, right? We need to have all of this connection. So it's coming from the faculty and students, but the administration, departments, colleges, the university administration, we need to, A, provide a whole lot of funding. And so just before Ambassador Mull said it's all about the money, I had written, it's all about the money, and underline that on my paper because it's not that faculty are, greedy and will only do things if there's money, but they need time. So I've been on so many interdisciplinary, center meetings, other discussions, and you get to a point and you realize, oh, the engineers don't understand how we do research. We need a whole hour just to talk to them about what a lab science looks like compared to what a very different field science looks like. I've had engineers tell me that the way I'm thinking about something is unethical because in their field, that would belong to an advisor who owned the data. And so what I'm talking, so, it just requires more time to sit and talk about the way that work gets done because the disciplines are segmented by area of focus, but also by method. And so it's in those methodological conversations that you really find great potential, but also your greatest misunderstandings. I think that if we can provide sufficient funding, then what happens is the faculty can take that time, they can do seed research, and then the young professors who require publications in going up for tenure can actually take that seed research and do the publications. When you come up for tenure, we like publications, period. They should be in good journals, but I've never seen a department say, well, that's in Nature and that's not our discipline, right? So I think as long as they have enough time and money and there's a reason to come together that is a problem, that is a good interdisciplinary question, then I think we're on the right path. And with that, I'll turn it over because I know we're over.
Thank you, Professor Wolford. No, that was just fine. I've been given some questions in the chat box here from members of the audience, but before I get to those, wanted to just maybe draw all of the participants, each of the participants out a little bit about some of the things they had said. I'm wondering whether, again, the literature which really invokes and encourages interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity and sees perhaps post-disciplinarity as the place we're supposed to arrive to. I find that kind of puzzling, sometimes off-putting, because I wonder, well, is multidisciplinarity necessarily ineffective? Professor Duncker, when he was talking about his experience being a postdoctoral researcher in Switzerland, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but it sounds as if he learned a lot from being part of a research group with, scientists dealing with, cancer and health problems and so on, perhaps from slightly different disciplines. It was a multidisciplinary dialogue, it sounded like. And he also mentioned how, an almost chance encounter when he was at the University of Waterloo by a faculty member from literally an adjacent department coming into his office and saying we should collaborate. So I think many people would agree that multidisciplinary cooperation has been fruitful and has, done people some good. Ambassador Mull mentioned that in his university, they have financial incentives and issues of, promotion of faculty and so on. They encourage faculty to reach out to colleagues in other disciplines and so on. And of course, universities as research establishments have been doing that sort of thing for a long time. Of course, kind of guided, funded research and so on. So universities are good at doing that. It's not necessarily more expensive for universities, or for that matter, large organizations like the National Science Foundation, to change its priorities in order to encourage certain kinds of research that are supposed to be more productive. But to make this into a question, which I hope some of you might respond to, however you choose, is, multidisciplinarity, isn't that good enough? Does it necessarily have to get into this kind of dream world of interdisciplinarity where somehow all of our interests are harmonized? We're not competing, no one's hurting anyone else's feelings. Multidisciplinarity seemed to be both safe and comforting and productive in, I think, some measurable ways. So I'd invite any one of you to kind of join in on that note and either tell me I'm wrong or...
That depends on the disciplinary perspective you have. So, it's actually a very interesting question. So, is multidisciplinarity enough? It may be enough for, some ways of learning. It does open up at least, understanding of epistemology. At least it prevents one from thinking that my discipline has the answer. So to that extent, it is a very necessary first step. Is it, I wouldn't say it is enough for the following reason, with the example of inequality, there are some problems, climate change is one, where you cannot have, you cannot have just disciplines coexisting and finding a solution. Therefore, the experience you had in Brazil, very similar experience for me or anybody we worked on women's movements. It's the same thing. Women's movements is not, it's every discipline, and no discipline is yet enough. And we need more disciplines, but certainly the intersection of disciplines like anthropology, oral history, political science, etc. So the problem, if education or research is to be about grand problem solving, at least to some extent, then multidisciplinarity is not enough. It is necessary, but we, as a first step, but we need to go beyond, because the questions are, on a slippery slope. And this is why some people are afraid to start on this journey altogether, that once you take the bigger query, you cannot stop. You have to get to the problem. So I will stop there.
Okay, thank you, Professor Mukherjee. Professor Duncker?
Yeah, just to build on Professor Mukherjee's comments, I think that it's very important to have robust disciplinary research. You get to a lot of answers, you develop a lot of tools, you know that it has strong value. So I'll say that's certainly our philosophy at the University of Waterloo. As much as we're promoting interdisciplinarity, we realize that to have strong interdisciplinarity, also supporting strong disciplinary research is important. When I take a look at some of the big developments, over the last a number of years technologically, right? So I'm a cell cycle researcher. I teach chemomolecular genetics, CRISPR, right? It's this revolutionary technique. It was from, pre-microbiology fundamental research that the discovery of CRISPR came about. And there's this amazing genetic tool now that has the possibility of really revolutionizing medicine. But on the other hand, it's a bit of a Pandora's box, right? I mean, there's all sorts of tailoring of the human genome. One could even imagine going down eugenic pathways with such a tool. So you get to the point where there are challenges where the technology is getting ahead of the policymakers. And so we absolutely need, the political scientists, the social scientists, we need them to be conversing with the technology developers that have to understand, I guess, the full implications of the technology. And of course, most recently, we're all, kind of perhaps simultaneously fascinated and terrified by ChatGPT and, the AI revolution, right? And again, a lot of that was very disciplinary, but now, it's very important, and students feel very passionate about this, that we, develop tech, but tech for good and ethical tech. And so anyway, I think it's an example that, to really make big advancements, you want to have core, very strong disciplinary research, but in a lot of situations, it's going to require, it's not enough to remain multidisciplinary. You're going to have to go to interdisciplinary.
Okay, thank you, Professor Duncker. Ambassador Professor Mull.
Thanks, Dennis. I completely agree with Vice Chancellor Mukherjee and Dean Duncker. It seems any serious academic pursuit has to begin with becoming an expert and developing a really deep understanding into one aspect of the bigger picture. And if you don't start your work as a scholar by specializing in that, you're not going to be able to contribute to the broader symbiotic processes that start involving other disciplines at a multidisciplinary level. So that's where every academic pursuit has to begin in a particular discipline if you're going to have an impact. I would avoid getting into a debate. Are we, is multidisciplinarity enough? Do we need to move towards more transdisciplinarity, post-disciplinarity? I wouldn't spend so much time in debating those terms. What's important is bringing together the different disciplines that are obviously all have part of the solution to the problem, and I love Provost Wolford's analysis that this really has to be focused on a problem that you're solving, and as long as you promote systems and opportunities for all of those disciplines to come together, either in forging a new discipline that goes beyond all of those, or drawing from the strengths and insights of particular disciplines, that's going to happen naturally. It's our job as universities administrators to make sure that the resources and structures and promotion processes are in place to push people to bring their expertise into these broader communities of acquiring knowledge. And we'll come up with a term of that at some point of what it is or not. What's important is just to make sure all of these disciplines are at the table together, solving the problem at hand.
Thank you, Ambassador Mull. Professor Wolford.
Well, again, it's hard to know how to contribute. I agree with what everybody said. I think a little bit back to Adam Smith, who, as the father of political economy, as I learned it at McGill, he was seeing the transformation in the English countryside from smallholding into factories, right? So he's standing at that bridge. And a lot of people think that Adam Smith was unabashedly in favor of this transition, but of course he was deeply troubled. And one of the things he said was, on the farm, whether it's in on someone else's piece of land or a freeholding, the farming family has to know a bit of everything. They have to be able to fix the machines. They have to be able to know when to plant, when to reap, etc. If they move into the cities and become a cog in this sort of assembly line, it will be the dumbing down of our population. And that's why he thought the state was so necessary for education. That was going to be education's role, was to help people be more balanced. And what the university did increasingly, of course, was to unbundle those disciplines, started with a couple, unbundle them so that we were looking at smaller and smaller things. And pretty soon you had people who were specializing in nitrogen, right? Unbundling things down to the smallest possible molecular levels. So I think we have a lot of work to do. I think that if it is multidisciplinary that helps people to come together in a room for the first time, then there's some advantage to that. If there are ways that working on problems helps to illustrate for people what it actually means to say that you're doing interdisciplinary work, I think that is really important. So I think it's going to be a lot of different efforts that help us to get where we are, but showing results. And so something like the pandemic, right? You can't understand where COVID came from and how it spread without an interdisciplinary team. You just can't. It's not a question that's just about microbes. It's about migration. It's about the forest, agriculture, land interface. It's about where people go to get their food and how they prepare and take care of it. It's then about public health and communication. It's a real opportunity for us to think in a totally fresh way about how we need to come together on these issues.
Okay, thank you, Professor Wolford. Again, all the participants were primed with certain questions to think about to prepare for this panel. Issues of money have been mentioned. And one of the questions we were asked to consider was, does interdisciplinarity or kind of moving beyond disciplinary silos necessarily involve more expense? Both Professor Wolford and Ambassador Mull in particular emphasize money. Is that really a significant factor, do you think? Is it really about money? Of course, there are other interesting questions too about the financial cost inherent in the reorganization of departments. If departments are dissolved, reconstituted, and so on, what is that going to mean? Even in a very mechanical human resources way, people who are redundant and so on. So money comes into it in different ways, and of course also the kind of financing of research, how that's conducted, what kind of emphasis that's given. Not to play devil's advocate here, but is money really the problem here? Or is money something that we just cannot avoid as we kind of contemplate this better condition of a university where both researchers and students are more flexible, more adept, better equipped to deal with the world? If anyone understood how I phrased that question, you're welcome to jump in. It's simply, obviously there are financial aspects to any kind of reorganization or kind of retooling of higher education. So I'm just inviting you to maybe expand on that a little bit. Ambassador Mull, you had your hand raised.
Sure. Obviously promoting interdisciplinarity is money is maybe not even the primary problem. There are a lot of other challenges. The essential conservative nature of academic culture in much of the world is a major problem in promoting interdisciplinarity. And money, not so much as a problem, as much as it is a lubricant to help ease the evolution that really has to happen in how people think about solving problems through in the world. But it's not the only ingredient to successfully getting to where we want to be in terms of interdisciplinarity. But it does provide an important incentive. Money has a habit of bringing people together from different backgrounds, and then that creates its own process, its own dynamic in way of thinking that will then be reinforced in other aspects of the academic enterprise. So I think it's a really important tool in promoting, but it's not the only factor by any means.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador Mull. Would anyone else like to address that particular point about the costs that we might anticipate in pivoting as institutions and as higher education generally to accommodate interdisciplinarity? Professor Duncker?
Yeah, I'd say certainly initially, if you've got some ideas of how to new approaches to encouraging interdisciplinary, it's going to cost some money, but it doesn't have to be a lot. We found, just seed grants, fairly small seed grants, where the criterion would be it has to be a new team coming together. You can't really have collaborated before. Maybe it'd be funding for graduate students or a postdoc. Yet we just launched a new interdisciplinary postdoctoral fellowship program, and the applicants we got were amazing. So, okay, it's a postdoc salary, but look who we've got here. And I spoke about bridges before. Wow, some of these applicants we got, they're already doing amazing interdisciplinary work. They've identified, co-supervisors from different faculties at the university, and we're very excited to have them. So yes, there'd be a little bit of upfront cost. I think personally, I run into issues at the university as some people see taking from central budget as a zero-sum game, so you might get some dean saying, whoa, all nice that you want to spend this money, but I've got all these needs and my units have all these needs. So I think it's making that argument that it's actually a really good investment. And it's going to come back to the university. There'll be indirect costs and returned overhead, et cetera, that'll flow from those future grants that are facilitated by the amazing productivity of, say, our new interdisciplinary postdocs at the institution, right? So there's that. I think you're definitely going to have some costs. They don't have to be exorbitant. And then there is a lot that you can do that doesn't really cost very much at all other than time and effort administratively. So that has to be factored in terms of restructuring, right? So it's interesting to see some departments at the university have started to really decentralize in terms of where their faculty members sit. So you could be part of the chemistry department, but we have a Waterloo Institute for Nanotechnology with its own dedicated building. So some of them are going to be in that building. and they're co-located with people for math and engineering. And so, but they're still part of chemistry, and it was just kind of a reorganization. So I just throw that out there in terms of the costs don't need to be exorbitant.
Yeah, I would just hop in and if I can just add on to the end of that and say, it does cost money. Unfortunately, our faculty don't work for free, and research costs money, but it isn't necessarily the case that, you know, it always upsets me when there are mandates out there that we hope that our faculty or students will follow, but there isn't any sort of central support for it. So we just hope they'll find time in their off hours or, you know, at coffee shops on the weekend to come together. I think we have to be able to support things that we call a priority. And so we fund research and positions all the time. Let's say we have 100 positions to hire this year. Well, if a certain number of those then will be in interdisciplinary positions, then their startup packages are going to necessarily need to include funds to have them make that kind of across the table work happen. So I agree with Dean Duncker that I don't think it's necessarily a zero-sum game, but at the same time, we will probably need to move resources that would have funded more basic research into this interdisciplinary category, if that's where we think a lot of valuable work has to take place. It can't just happen, you know, in the hallways and on breaks kind of thing. We are going to need to support it.
See. Thank you, Professor Wolford. If no one else would like to address that issue directly, there's one question I have in my chat box, which I'm going to slightly rephrase. It's basically asking about how higher education institutions need to reorganize their activities in order to lead to more gainful employment of students. That's something that we're concerned about all the time. I can't remember a time in my own experience when employability of students wasn't an issue. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So I was actually going to say exactly that, you know, money is one problem. And I think the problem with money is more that we cannot give up disciplinary research entirely or disciplinary knowledge, just as, you know, many of us discuss. We need to have both. And that's where the financial challenge comes. But a bigger challenge is perception of society and perception of employers. So employers have, while, you know, we hear all these things about soft skills are missing, creative thinking is necessary, out of the box, innovative thinking is necessary. All those things can happen in an interdisciplinary approach, but the employers have to appreciate the worth of that. And the narrative that our students get is still the same. You're either an engineer or a scientist or a lawyer or any one of those things. But the value of their creativity that might come is not necessarily seen by them in terms of employability. In our university, we've had some very good experience where students say that they have actually gained from that multidisciplinary experience. But if it has to be broadened, then I think we need to have more dialogue with employers on how the world would appreciate, just as, you know, through the tenure promotion process, we need a dialogue with foundations that fund, with professors who are the senior most people in the field, who, you know, are the editors of the topmost journals. We need those kind of dialogue, and we need a dialogue with employers to make the case, to understand, you know, what works, what doesn't work, and then to have a really coordinated approach so our students don't feel like they did something really innovative, but then go to the market feeling afraid of what their future is. That would, you know, defeat the purpose for what we would innovate new kinds of programs. And I don't mean this in an instrumental way that education must translate into jobs. All I'm saying is society must understand and appreciate the value of broader education.
I see. Thank you, Professor Mukherjee. My internet connection is kind of unstable. I didn't catch all of what you said, but the last part, talking about, as educators, we always worry about not being understood by society at large. We're always anxious about whether our own missions or purposes are shared and so on. And then, of course, we have this factor of the students. And I think, as you rightly pointed out, Professor Mukherjee, we don't want the students to simply be our guinea pigs. We think we're doing something good for them, but they don't necessarily see that when they go out in the working world or go on to further studies or whatever. I personally have always wondered whether, so many concepts, ideas in higher education and so on, which are, supposed to save us, supposed to improve things. And one of my own concerns about concepts like interdisciplinarity, or at least applied interdisciplinarity, is that it's great for the intellectuals, but does it work does it work at the ground level? Above all, our students going to benefit, not that they're the only stakeholders, but several of you have mentioned, and it's kind of obligatory for us as educated people to talk about being generally educated. And as Professor Wolford pointed out, invoking Adam Smith, we don't want over-specialization so that people are simply cogs in a machine, and then the machine needs to be, the machine becomes obsolete, or it needs to be replaced or whatever, and what happens then. So obviously, the students we teach are in a difficult situation all the time, just as we once were. What roles can students play in kind of driving this process? Because Ambassador Mull, for example, mentioned the introduction of some new interdisciplinary majors at the University of Virginia. And even when I was a student at the University of Virginia, where there were some rather experimental majors which students enjoyed, and the faculty involved enjoyed being part of them. Some of those majors no longer exist. Some of them are still there. We can, of course, change majors and change the curriculum, just as universities always do. But we have to, of course, always be aware of what we are doing intentionally or not to our students. Sorry, to bring this to a sharper point, what role do the students have in kind of deciding the directions that we take, whether in terms of interdisciplinarity or post-disciplinarity or whatever? Just something for any one of you to respond to.
Maybe I can jump in quickly, because I'm afraid I'll have to hop off shortly, and I apologize.
Okay, thank you.
This has been a really wonderful session. I very much enjoyed talking to my colleagues. I feel like we have a lot to learn from each other, but a lot of similarities. I think, I've seen the students really pushing us further in this interdisciplinary direction. And also, they're idealists, right? So many of them. And I feel like they come in thinking about issues, and sustainability is a huge one. We have 40 student clubs around the sustainability issue on campus. We have a student-run farm. They're pushing us to say, how is my education going to matter? And this is a moment when, people talk about the crisis cliff, and I think that's maybe unfortunate language, but we do have so many global problems that are being felt at the local level, right, in different ways. So the students are understandably anxious. They're understandably interested in making a difference with their education. And what we're seeing is that the desire to go internationally, to be in places where they can talk to colleagues, see multiple perspectives, that's huge. And a lot of the interest is in these sort of experiential, let's go work with an organization or a community in another place where we can really sit and talk about how I could bring engineering, where I've looked at gravity-powered water filtration. How can I bring that with me and really think about how working with a community requires me to go back and re-understand the fundamentals of the discipline? So it isn't simply students wanting to go out in the world armed with good knowledge that they deliver onto others like some kind of, benefactor, right? That's a model that I think hopefully we're sort of moving beyond. It's really about, I can't do good science or good work unless I know how this is being thought about in other places by other people. I can understand that through this kind of immersion. And then I can take that back and then I can sit in class and say to the professor, the way that you pose that doesn't make any sense in these different communities. Can we rethink how we're asking the question? And I'll give one example from my area, which is in food or the global food system. There was a move to acquire huge pieces of land in the wake of the global food crisis in 2007, 2008. And the big question from the FAO, from the World Bank, was how can we produce more food, right? And we all said, let's take a step back and say, the real question is, why are certain people hungry and being dispossessed of their lands? And it turned out that that question of how can we produce more food was actually oppositional to or antithetical to the question of how can we reduce hunger. So the question matters, and our students are pushing us to try to determine the questions in more participatory, more engaged, more immersive ways. And I think we will end up doing that, and that will end up preparing them well for careers.
Thank you, Professor Wolford. A couple of you are indicating in chats that your understanding was that this session was an hour. I'm sorry, I should have clarified that. I was told it was an hour and 15 minutes. I understand if you might have to leave at this point, you're excused, and I really enjoyed being the moderator for the session, and thank you for participating if you have to leave at this point. If you do not, however, please stay online or on camera, and we'll continue for about almost 10 more minutes, 7 or 8 more minutes. Thank you for your patience. Since Professor Wolford said a few things about students working on real world problems, working in the community and that sort of thing, in a lot of policy documents about interdisciplinarity and reorganization of learning and research and so on, that's often twinned with the invocation of practical work application. Students should have internship opportunities. Certainly at Jindal University, having just joined this place about 2 years ago, I'm still a little bit shocked at how willing and ready we have to be to help students with internships and so on. So it's something that I'm getting used to. The two issues are not necessarily related, except that in the way that Professor Wolford mentioned that it's assumed that one test of the value of interdisciplinarity is that a learner can kind of put himself or herself in a particular situation where they apply their knowledge. And again, that's why internships and field exposure and so on are often done, periodically, after every semester or every year or something, so that a student has an opportunity to kind of process what they've learned in the classroom. I would like to think that's true, and I guess I've seen a little bit of some evidence of that happening, but I wonder whether any of you have any further observations about the importance of both in connection with giving students a kind of leg up so that they have some experience in a quote unquote work environment before they are awarded their degrees, so that they will know what they're getting into. They will have some experience, they'll have developed some skills. As Professor Mukherjee said, in India, we kind of misguidedly call them soft skills. They're not at all soft skills, but there are various practical tools as well as soft skills that they might have acquired through internships and work exposure and so on. Would anyone like to comment on that in its relation to this new kind of curriculum that we're supposed to be building? Professor Duncker.
Yeah, I mean, so at Waterloo, we've pioneered co-op, right? And so we have a huge proportion of students who alternate between academic terms and paid work terms. And I can tell you that has been a huge, differentiator for our institution. It's a rich resource, as has already been articulated. We have students who go out, work in all sorts of sectors. They come back to the classroom. They contribute so much to the discussion. They go out and they see what the problems are. They identify gaps in various sectors, right? And they bring it into the discussion, and other students get interested in this. And this is fed into another sort of aspect at University of Waterloo that has been a big success, and that's startup companies, student-driven startups, and actually undergrad-driven startups. So we have a program called Velocity, and it's just amazing to see what these students do. And it's interesting. I think over my time at Waterloo, the shift for these student entrepreneurs, I think in the early days, it was all about, dollar signs in their eyes, and they wanted to become rich. I would say it's just as much, if not more, they want to do something beneficial for the planet now. I'm seeing that more and more. So ideally both, of course, for these student entrepreneurs, but the one feeds into the other, that work experience. They come back, they know that this or that doesn't work. They know there are these problems out there, and then they're really eager and energize themselves to do something about it. And nearly always these students assemble interdisciplinary teams. So they're not just sticking to, their home department. I mean, they're meeting like-minded, students from across campus that want to tackle certain problems or issues for different sectors.
I see. Thank you, Professor Duncker. Would anyone else like to chip in on that point about the value of students' work experience, work exposure, and also as a way of kind of shaping their own motivations, or right, even the way the choices that they make about their learning reflect changing motivations?
Right. So, I agree with that, the importance of, the practical application, and where you're starting from a problem, you need to think from the problem and not from the discipline. However, for me, interdisciplinarity is also important as an intellectual tool, even when you're not thinking in the realm of application, just thinking about a problem, or like, I think, somebody mentioned, did you mention democracy probably as an area of research, inequality as an area of research. Before we think of how we can solve the problem, I see the goal or the value of multidisciplinarity or interdisciplinarity as framing and understanding the problem from different perspectives. And I think, sometimes I take your point about how in India we have to rush to provide internship opportunities to students. I think in India we've gone from no practical exposure to a kind of extreme hunger for practical exposure at every point in time, to the extent that sometimes maybe the space for intellectually developing the understanding of the problem is being compromised, right? So we have to be very careful about that. And where I would like to see the role of interdisciplinarity or multidisciplinarity more is in this conceptualization also, even if we're dealing with a very abstract theoretical problem. And to know, in Canada, when we had the framework for assessing graduate capacity, one of the criteria, which I always valued a lot, was knowing the limits of one's knowledge. So a graduate must have that capacity to know the limits of his or her knowledge. And I think interdisciplinarity is a very good framework to enable us to understand what we don't know or the limits to our knowledge. And to me, that is a very, very important aspect of university education. And that's where I would see a very big emphasis for looking beyond a single discipline.
Thank you, Professor Mukherjee. We are now running out of time, and I did not leave any time for myself, but I find myself utterly persuaded by what Vice Chancellor Mukherjee had to say. I'm so happy to hear someone talk about the intellectual value of interdisciplinarity, and it gives us hope and so on. I really appreciate those final comments. I don't want to waste any more time trying to sum up. This has been a very wide-ranging conversation, and I thank you all for participating. As I said, I warned you at the beginning, I thought the questions that were given you would kind of prime the conversation rather than structure it. I hope you didn't find it too confusing, but I really found this conversation very stimulating, and I hope we have an opportunity to take up some of these issues again in a different forum. Any other observations from other panelists before we close the session?
We should find a way to continue the discussions. It was very interesting.
Yes, I hope we can do that also. Again, thank you, Professor Mukherjee, Professor Duncker, Professor Mull, Professor Wolford. I'm sorry about the confusion about the time that was available to us, but we have used our appointed time. I hope to see many of you in perhaps future OP Jindal Global University, World University Summits. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.